The only way to crack through a genealogy brick wall is to have a plan. Today, we're going to talk about how to develop a research plan that will help you be more methodical and more successful in solving your research. And I promise you there will be a few tips that you hadn't even thought of. Now, a viewer asked, how do I determine if a woman listed as a servant in my second great-grandfather's great-aunt's house in the 1880 census with the same name as my second great-grandmother is my second great-grandmother? Great question. We love answering these questions in our live shows or in the comment sections of each video. Make sure you're taking advantage of leaving comments on my videos as much as you're leaving comments on Andy's. So what do we do? Now, one of the things that most genealogy educators fail to do is to tell you to draw out your problem, to draw out the clues that you have to see how they're connected, to draw out the family trees to see what you're trying to prove or disprove. Visualizing your problem can help you figure out what you need to do and then develop the traditional first step of developing a quality research question. We're looking at my second great-grandfather's great-aunt's house. Well, that lends itself to drawing a family tree. So we'll start with ourselves, and then we go up to parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-parents. So then we need to get to the great-aunt. In order to get to the great-aunt, we need to add 2 more generations, because if we go here, and these ladies are siblings, but if we go here, we're just at an aunt. We need to go to a great-aunt, which means we need to go up 2 generations to a set of common ancestors that are up there off the screen, and then we have a sibling. Now, this female could also be the sibling of the male. That is less important right now for the demonstration, but you will definitely want to map out the correct relationship generation to generation to generation. Are we following the female, the male, female, male, and then sibling? That's for you to decide. But for the sake of this video, we have made our tree, and now we have the great aunt of the great grandfather in a house. And what is happening in that house? Well, there is a servant. And that servant seems to have the same name as second great-grandfather's wife. And what is also not in that question, which could be the same, but you need to spell it out, are they the same age? So if they're of the same age, are they from the same birthplace? These are things we're going to need to know before we go any further. Because if these 2 people have the same name but are 20-year age difference, likely not from the same location, then they might not be the same. However, how much does your employer really know about you? Do they really know when and where you were born? Well, that becomes a little bit of a challenge. So the next step we're going to do is we're going to generate some specific research question. Now, the overall research question is, are these 2 women the same? But just like any major goal needs to be broken down to smaller goals so that you can actually resolve them, that's the same thing here. We need to develop specific research questions to tackle the major research question. So one of the first questions we're going to ask is, who are the relatives of second great-grandmother? We've established that second great-grandfather goes up 2 generations to this great-aunt. But let's research second grandmother. Now, hopefully, because you've researched a second great grandfather, you've researched all of their children. Now, when you're researching all of their children, you're looking for any and all clues that can help you understand the time and place that this second great grandmother was born and potentially get clues as to who her relatives are. From there, you're trying to figure out who her parents are. And we're also trying to figure out who her siblings are, and then who her cousins are, as well as her aunts and uncles. Do you see how many other questions we have to ask for this question of who's the great-grandmother? And that will help us try to figure out if she's the same person as the servant. Now, you might be thinking, I don't know very much. She's kind of like a brick wall. Well, that's okay. That's my little stop sign. I'll put an S so we remember what it was. That leads us to our next set of questions, which all relate to servants. We need to find out when she was born, when she was married, and when did she die. All of those are her vital events. So we then need to see on these different records, do we figure out any relatives or potential relatives? How are we going to figure that out? Well, we'll come back to that in a little bit. But you see, we may have one primary question of, are these two women related? But we have a series of additional questions that we need to resolve before we can even attempt to answer the question of, are these two people related? Which leads me to our next step, which very few people talk about, and that is identifying what your research challenges may be. Now, having a business background, we talked about the SWOT analysis quite often. A SWOT analysis talks about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Now, you might be thinking, how does that work in genealogy research? Well, you may be researching in a location that has a lot of records for the time and place your ancestor lived. That's a strength. An opportunity would be all of those records are online and you can take advantage of them. So what are your weaknesses and threats in genealogy research? Well, I kind of combine both of those together into the limitations that you may face in whether you're actually going to be able to solve this question. As a reminder, we know that servant is from the 1880 census record. So that should help trigger some limitations for you right away. So 1880 would be the U.S. Census record, and what happened 10 years later? Well, there was the loss of the 1890 census. Now, depending on where your ancestor lived, they could be one of the 6,000 lucky ducks who were actually still recorded in records that have survived to this day. But the chances are pretty slim. So, what is that limitation? Well, that means we're going to have to look at alternative records. There are plenty of alternative records, but it is a limitation we have to be aware of. So what's the next one? Servants should be a very big red flag in your research. It's not that nobody wanted to record them, but it's very difficult to tie a servant to their family members from a census record. You don't necessarily have a lot of clues to work with. Additionally, servants tend to move around a lot. And that makes it hard to keep track of their records. So she could be a servant in the household in 1880, and let's say she is in Arkansas, but then in 1881 or 85, she could be over in California or the New Mexican Territory or anywhere in between. And you're not necessarily going to know because often a servant doesn't leave enough clues for us to be able to track them down. So that's an obstacle in solving this problem. Now, another one that I hope you recognize is a challenge is we are researching two females. And researching two females is a challenge. In fact, There are numerous videos on my channel and my colleagues' channel and conference seminars that talk about how to find female ancestors. Now, I don't want you to be discouraged because there are more records for women than you really think, but you have to recognize it is difficult. There often are more records for males than there are for females. So once you have tallied up all of your potential challenges with answering all of those questions from the previous step, then develop your research plan to help guide your research. So part of that plan should include all the steps necessary for you to fully research that second great grandmother, just like we talked about before. You need to look at records that directly state who she is, who her relatives are, and any biographical facts about her. The next set of information you're going to look at are records that indirectly talk about her. Maybe she's not named. For instance, there could be a 1940 census record for a child that said where his parents are from, naming the father and the mother, and that could be an indirect clue about her. There are a lot of other records that are indirectly talking about that second great grandmother, and you will want to look for those. Also part of your research plan, to develop those strategies that you need to crack that brick wall, is to fully research that servant. Now, we talked about looking for birth, marriage, death, as well as additional records. Some of those may include city directories, newspapers, my favorite. I love city directories because depending on the town that your ancestor lives in, you could trace them every single year from 1890 back in time, so 1879, 1878, and you can go forward to 1881, 82, and so on. And what are you looking for in those city directories is you're looking for when did she start showing up in the household of the great aunt, and when did she stop? Those are important clues to help you attempt to resolve the question of, well, did she stop about the same time that second great grandfather married second great grandmother? Now you can do the same thing with newspaper research. You're going to look for birth, marriage, and death information in there, but you also want to see if there are ads placed by the great aunt of second great grandfather trying to hire a servant. When did she place ads to get the servant? And when did she place ads to get another servant? And those could be clues. They're not direct, but they are clues to consider in those newspapers. Now, another thing you want to do is to fully research great aunt. And when I mean fully research great aunt, I want you to research all the records about great aunt and her closest family members, her children, her spouse, her siblings. Because what happens if servant goes to the household of a child, or servant goes to the household of an uncle, or a niece or a nephew? Then that would answer your question. Maybe servant isn't the wife of second great grandfather because she's showing up in a different location in those close relatives' home. But that's not all. There are more search strategies that you're going to need to employ beyond just directly researching either one of the females and their close relatives. This involves some advanced genealogy research strategies. Are you ready? Did you watch my video on same name rule out strategy? Now, this is a methodology that a lot of genealogists talk about, but there really isn't a name for. But what you're doing is you're researching everybody in an area and sometimes even throughout the country, because remember, we have a servant and they can move around. We're going to research everybody with the same name of the same age to be servant and or great grandfather's wife. Be careful that you don't assume that the information on the 1880 census for servant is absolutely accurate. So you definitely want to capture everybody in that net and then rule out the ones that can't be her or second great grandmother and filter down your list. Now, the next advanced strategy is to do a one name study. So they have the same name, so they share the same surname. So you want to research everybody with that surname in the close proximity to where they're living in the 1880 census. So you want to see if you can figure out if servant belongs to any of the family members in the nearby location. Eventually, you're going to develop a number of hypotheses that you can now test with DNA research. Now, the thing that you need to know is you have to have figured out some relatives for the servant. DNA doesn't work if you don't know what her DNA could be. You don't know what her descendants might be. So if you have some hypotheses of the family she could be a part of, and then you have the known matches and descendants of second great grandfather, you can then compare the two. But DNA isn't going to work unless you have found any relatives for that servant. Now, the final step is to begin using inferential genealogy techniques. Before we show you what I came up with, recognize this is just hypothetical. If you come up with these clues, this could be your answer. I'm leaving the research for our viewer. Our first clue, using the same name research strategy, there were 5 females with the same name in the same location. As we did the rule out part of this same name research, we found that there were only 3 that were of the right age to be either one of these women. According to newspapers, great aunt advertised a servant position in the same year. Great grandfather and great grandmother tied the knot. After this year, we can't find any more records documenting servant. We also can't find any death record for the servant with just her name as a single person. A few years later, great aunt hired a younger female with the same surname as these 2 women. Servant and this extra female seem to be sisters. In 1870, there is a household with potentially this female and definitely this female. DNA evidence of the father in this household match descendants of this family. In the comments section below, I want you to make a conclusion that takes all of these different pieces of evidence and infers how they all fit together. Are the 2 women the same? Do we need more evidence? And if we need more evidence, what additional evidence do we need? Are you ready to take the challenge? Not every brick wall can come down. Some of the limitations you may face are lack of records, lack of DNA testers, or lack of descendants of the people that you're trying to piece together that to have DNA or records. Sometimes divine intervention will need to be called upon. Now, if you want to watch a brick wall series take place and break down step by step with a modified version of what I showed you here, check out this playlist above.